Hello everyone, we're here to have a discussion about storytelling and what is our personal opinions on what is mature storytelling.
Oh
You
god.
can't see it, but I'm waving my... Yeah, cut the voice. Right. What's wrong with my intro?
Nothing. It's just I didn't know we were doing mature storytelling.
Well, storytelling in general. How it can be improved. Any problems you have with it. Themes, stories, characters, writing.
I think modern storytelling is going through a weird transition stage at the moment where you've
Mm-hmm.
got lots of exploration in lots of different areas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think sometimes they make characters needless, well, not necessarily needlessly. A big thing that they like to do with main character points, with main characters, is they like to put them through a transition that suddenly brings them back down several notches to make them an
Mm-hmm.
ordinary person. I can see why they're doing it, because the way you do that is it allows the audience to connect more with the main character, who a lot of the time is the audience's way into the show. You go, oh, they're like me. I can connect with them in a more. I can connect with them now on an emotional level a bit more. That we have more similarities, which is the main reason you go through arcs like that. But equally, the reason you do it, superheroes is the big thing at the moment with movies at least, and TV series as they're swamping a lot of that now. It's going through this arc of you make a superhero someone who is superhuman, therefore superior, by making their flaws and their faults more obvious and having to go through a phase of dealing with them. It shows they are just like us. They are like ordinary people. They deal with the same issues that we do. There's pros and cons to that. On the one hand, you've got it makes it more accessible to an audience. It's the idea of everyone can be a hero because even heroes go through the same problems that we do, which is nice in that way. It's uplifting. It's which is exactly what superheroes do. It's the point of there's something to idolize, but equally it's the reminder of they go through the same problems that we do. So they're
Mm-hmm.
not. It's not an unobtainable ideal that we can never reach. So why bother trying? It's a thing of well, we could. They do go through the same problems as us, so we can actually attain to the same position that they are. On the other hand, it's sometimes if it's done poorly,
Maleficent! Sorry.
yes,
And,
you get the sense of well, you're doing it to needlessly. You're making it blatant of what you're trying to do. If it's such a huge diversion away from the character, and usually they're established characters, which is why it happens. If it's an established character that you do it to, you think, all right, I understand why you're doing it, and it's an interesting arc that you're going with to try and explain how they became the person that we know them to be. Sometimes it was an origin story,
ugh.
but
Sorry,
equally
that
you're
one
going,
makes me...
well, do we need to know the story sometimes? If it's an established character, sometimes we all know the origin story. Everyone knows the origin story for Spider-Man and Batman. We don't need to see it a lot of the time.
Spider-Man came from Krypton and Batman got bitten by a radioactive bat.
Yes, we all know these facts. And Superman's Uncle Ben was killed in an alleyway in Gotham. We all know this.
Yeah, clearly it happened.
But nevertheless, sometimes they like to remind us of it. It's just almost hammering home the point a bit too far,
Mm-hmm.
which I can find a bit aggravating. If it's done overkill, it's that situation of you do it a few times, it's fine. When you do it too much, it's everywhere. There's nothing special about it anymore.
Okay. Point one. Just writing this down. This is a professional debate now. I'm writing things down. You know.
I'm trying Gotham, the TV series, is running at the moment.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that mind that existed. Sorry.
That's a bit of a better way to look at how you do, because it's set obviously around it's set around. It starts, I think, with the murder of Thomas and Martha Wayne.
Yes, it does.
I wouldn't have started it there. I would have started it before then, so we get to meet them.
Yes.
And like it would have been a series one or series two finale where you have them being killed. We all know what's going to happen anyway, which is kind of why
So do you need? Yeah. Do you need to show it? We know what's going to happen.
It's not just that. It's a prequel story. Well, we know who that kid is. We know who all these characters are going to become. And I do agree. Sometimes it is interesting to go. Where did they come from? How did they become the characters that we know them to be? I find that interesting sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the kind of thing where you try to put in hints to suggest, oh, who might this character be? When the audience all know, we know who it's going to be. He's going to be the Riddler. We've known this from you introduced him. He's a police forensic scientist who likes riddles. Who could he possibly turn
He's
into?
been around for 50 years. We get it.
But I do like that they're actually putting the angle on Jim Gordon, who actually doesn't get a lot of the limelight.
No, he doesn't.
He's a major character, but he doesn't. We don't get a lot of. Certainly not in the comics. We don't.
If you want insight into Jim Gordon, Batman Year One, which is basically Batman Begins, like weirdly, like almost identical. It's weird, but there's you spend a lot of time with Jim.
But that's the only time. I mean, a lot of the time he's not the main character. He's not the main focus. It wouldn't be. Batman is. So that's one thing I like about Gotham. We get a nice light on Jim Gordon, and it's a little bit about more to do with the police force. But equally, what everyone's always going is who's the next villain going to be? Everyone was speculating on Series 1. When's the Joker going to appear?
Well, I would argue you don't need him. The Joker has no backstory.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need him. But it's that whole thing of the reason you're doing it is to get the next villain, because that will get you more viewing points. I mean, a lot of the time they could just leave it. They could just focus on the crime. You don't need the supervillains. It's nice as an Easter egg, as a reference, and little bits. And sometimes you can do it with some characters a little bit more. I mean, they brought in Cobblepot, who will become the Penguin, quite early on, and that kind of makes sense because he's organised crime. He's a character you can work into it. Catwoman, or Catgirl as she is, because I think she's 12 at the moment.
Yeah, it's odd.
To put in, because I'm thinking, we know she becomes a cat burglar.
Well, I'll argue Selina has no real definitive backstory. The only one you've got is Long Halloween. The closest thing you get to the backstory, she's a cat burglar. That's where it ends, really. She occasionally has a young girl psychic.
I couldn't put her in at a young age. Still.
No, it's...
Same with Riddler. I mean, alright, sometimes you can put them in, but don't make them too much of the focus of the series. I would argue the reverse of that, which it does very well, was Smallville.
Too much.
I like Smallville.
Too much teen drama for me.
It was a bit teen drama, but that was the audience angle. Gotham was for an older audience. But Smallville was angled at teens.
Yeah.
It was on Saturday mornings sort of time, or late afternoon on a weekday, sort of early evening time. And it was angled for teen drama. It was family teen stuff. And I kind of liked that in that way. I thought Smallville was very well written as well. It's a big thing.
Well, yeah. That's
because I thought some of the characterizations was clever. At the same time, it suffered from the same problem. No, Smallville did it better, I think, because Smallville actually, because it had a much longer run and it's finished, we can talk about that, because it ran for 10 seasons. They managed to only have like one major villain per season, which I thought was quite clever in some ways. I mean, you had the whole arc with Lex was obviously going to be a main character from start to finish. You couldn't not do that. Because Lex and Superman have a long backstory going all the way back to the start of it. That's establishing continuity, that's not new. But they didn't have loads of villains in season 1, which is what Gotham suffered from. Because you've had Catwoman, Riddler, Penguin, and things like that. You had them all in the one in pretty much the opening few episodes. They were all introduced. You didn't need to do that. That's overkill. That's putting them in there a bit too much for my liking. When it comes to mature storytelling, which I think is what we're getting onto,
just general state of storytelling.
Mature storytelling is difficult to do because it comes down to what an audience and what people. It's what producers, writers, and audience all think mature means, and they've all got different things.
What do you think maturity means?
I don't really know, because in my mind, mature is a very odd word, because on the one hand, you've got mature. Well, I know mature can mean...
Can I ask a question?
Adult. Yes.
Yeah, if I was about to ask, does dark and gritty make mature mean it's mature? If something's dark and gritty.
Yes and no. It's weird.
I would argue done too much. Darkness works. One, in terms of adult storytelling, in my mind, it's all about allegories and subtext. You have an adult audience. They hopefully have brains. They can work things out. You don't need to shove it down their throats non-stop.
I agree with that.
You can have allegories. Things can mean different things. When we get onto video games, my shtick, Silent Hill series is a wonderful series for mature storytelling because everything's an allegory for some very dark shit in those games. But they're not overkill. It's done only when it makes sense. Let's go for the big one, the newest Tomb Raider game. It shoves it down your throat so much that she's vulnerable. Arguably not. She has genital health. This is the most durable Lara Croft we've ever had. But I would argue, if you want to do that game like that, you do it differently. You put her alone. Get rid of all the other human characters of that island. She's on this island. She is alone. Trapped. She can't leave. She has to survive. And it's all about her and her psychology. All the other characters are meaningless. They're just here to try and set up this weird thing. Don't overkill it. Don't do extreme violence all the time. Do it once. It affects her. And then have her the journey getting over it. Don't just keep doing it and doing it and doing it because it's coming off as immature because you're not letting it settle in your mind.
I think that a lot of modern audiences and I think producers more than writers are a lot of the time at the mercy of producers.
Well, yeah, I give Rhiannon Pratchett, who wrote the new Tomb Raider games, way more credit than she's due. She's a wonderful. She wrote the Overlord series, hilarious. And I prefer to blame Square Enix because they're trying to AAA mainstream Lara Croft, which she's never been. Even when she was in the height of the 90s, she was never mainstream gaming.
Yeah.
The series is always by making an action game. And any fan of Tomb Raider tell you, you don't play a Tomb Raider game for the shooting sequences. You play it for the puzzle solving and the platforming. That's why you're there. It's a very slow-paced game. They're trying to make it an action game. And by making her a traditional, stereotypical female, tragic, another word I hate, tragedy, female superhero, basically, who has a dark background, who's been through shit, usually at the mercy of men, because that's another popular thing. And while that inherently is not a bad thing, it's done all the fucking time. And the Tomb Raider series was once this unique thing. Now it's just another generic action, grey, gritty, action third-person shooter, cover-based shooter. All the stuff that originality was lost, including the character. Because Lara Croft is wonderfully funny, sarcastic, has a great sense of humour, voiced by Kitty Hawes before. And she had moments when, in Tomb Raider Underworld, there's a moment where she loses her rag and goes, angry. And it's generally like, okay, underneath that, this facade, this playful, traditional kind of thing, there's this, there's a darker side to her. And I like that more, but just that little hint. But you never get the reason of why. It's just assumed everyone has a dark side.
A part of me would say that the reason that it suffered is that it's going more for an action thing.
Yeah,
and certainly from a gaming perspective, I know one of the most successful game series is the Call of Duty games.
Even they don't take themselves seriously anymore. The new one's got mechs in it. And
but because that has had such a huge impact in terms of is it the most successful?
It is, I think, pretty much out there. Although, while Sims was the most successful PC franchise of all time, I think Call of Duty is well and truly shot over the head.
One of those things that producers go, that's successful, let's make it like that.
Oh yeah, I solely blame Square Enix. The game sold 2.1 million and that was considered a failure. Well, that's not a failure. That's that game had way too much budget for what it needs to do.
Yeah.
You can make a budget. The best Tomb Raider game recently is the Tomb Raider and the Guardian of Light, which is basically Diablo. It's a top-down isometric perspective. And it's a great game. And the game industry has no restrictions. They have insanely large budgets. The best art you get always comes from that of restrictions. Have a very, very tight budget. It forces you to be creative, interesting.
Yeah.
That's why indie games, some of them are pretentious, not their own ass. Yeah, but there are some wonderful artistic moments. Papers, Please is a game made entirely on a budget. And it works because of it. It's a labour of love, not a labour of trying to make money.
They're always a lot of indie games are quite clever. There's one that I've seen being played. I wouldn't play. I think it's the Something of Isaac.
The Binding of Isaac.
That's the one.
That game is dark as shit.
That's dark and twisted as hell, but it's clever in terms of that's clever. The plot line for it and the way and the narrative. It's dark as hell. And twisted as anything, but it's clever because I've not seen a plot line or a game like it in that way.
The plot to the new Tomb Raider game is your stereotypical exploitation film. You've watched it, but it plays it 100% straight.
Yeah,
something that is so over the top, and by the end of it, it's a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. The amount of things get thrown, shot at her, punched into her, impaled through her. It's a Wile E. Coyote cartoon. And I say, what's your origin story? I don't care where she comes from. The defining part of Lara Croft is the same thing as Batman. Her parents are killed suddenly under mysterious circumstances. And that's what drives her. And that's that universal fear, that fear of loss, especially someone you love and care for and rely on. That sudden moment that you lose it. You're truly and utterly alone. At a young age, her parents are lost. They die. And it's that idea of her determination to find out what happened causes her to kind of go on this crusade almost to find out what happened. And that's... Carry on.
That's why Gotham works in that way, that we're dealing with a young Bruce Wayne. He's not the main character because he's a kid. He can't do much. That's why Batman Begins works as a good film, because you're dealing with him as an adult. And it's literally the moment he becomes Batman. What I'm presuming with the Lara Croft games is she's still a teenager.
Yeah, she's really young, which annoys me as well.
It wouldn't work in the same way, because it's the same thing of... It's an interesting plot line. Make it a comic.
It's not. It's the most cliche-ridden island survival thing. I've watched Lost. I was interested for the game. It's been interesting, but then it's just... You're not trying. And I give Rhiannon Pratchett more credit. You're not trying, Square Enix. You just want a quick cash cow to make some money. And you're going to piss off a lot of the old school fans. The old school fans didn't play it for the action. And if they did, they're playing the game wrong, because the gunplay in this game is just shite. You play it for the platform and the puzzle solving. Hell, Legend Underworld Lara is way more interesting, because a lot of stuff isn't directly told to you. And it's that crusade that want to know what's happened. And something you don't have no idea. And that drive and obsession. Not how much PTSD can you give her so she can wear a hoodie and be psychoanalyzed, as Rise of the Tomb Raider is doing. Which is not what Lara Croft is about. Lara Croft is an ideal. It's like Indiana Jones. We never need an in-depth study on who Indiana Jones is and what makes him that way. It's an ideal. I wish I could...
There was the Young Indiana Jones TV series.
Yeah, but that was shite. And even then, in Last Crusade, you get a small fraction of his childhood. A small fraction. You don't get an in-depth thing going for university, where he got the jacket from, where he got the whip from. It's just a small hint and go, one little insight, because it's small, it's subtle, and the rest you fill in your head.
Well, that's why Wolverine Origins didn't work.
Yeah.
Because it answered questions we didn't need answering.
Where people come from is very rarely the main focus. Where people are going is more, and why they're going there.
I mean, at the same time, it's kind of you can tell us what happened to you, but we don't need a film about it.
Oh, I don't really care.
Games about it, because it's just tell us, because you can summarise it in a paragraph. And you're right, you won't get all the nuances and the extra details and things like that. We missed that you might...
Well, you can fit in yourself. Make everyone's experience unique rather than try to force one particular vision. It will encourage discussion, and intellectual discussion, rather than just virulent hate. That is most of the internet. And before anyone asks, no, the game is not sexist or misandric. Well, you can read into it, but I personally believe it's just badly written. There is no malice behind it. It's not maliciously bad against men or women. It's just badly written.
Yeah.
Malice is not the same as ignorance.
Well, that thing of it's simple cash cow situation of the story suffers as a result of what they're trying to do to the game. Just going back onto storytelling, the idea of mature.
Oh yeah.
For I think a lot of people, the idea of mature storytelling these days is it features large amounts of gratuitous violence. Wrong. You don't think it does?
No, they're wrong. That's not what mature is.
Yeah.
That's maturity to a 13-year-old. That's the 13.
I don't agree with this definition, but this is what people think. Because if I had to think of mature, the first thing that comes into my mind when it comes to mature stuff in terms of what most of an audience would think is, I know you hate it, is Game of Thrones.
Do you think it's mature?
I wouldn't...
I don't care if you like it. You can like things immature, I don't mind. But do you think
I like Game of Thrones. I like the books more than I do the series.
Oh, right, that's something
I'm season at the moment. But I know, because friends of mine do watch it, and I try and avoid spoilers, something's happened in the most recent episode, which I think is episode 6 or something. It's to do with the rape of a major character. Doesn't happen in the books, apparently.
Well, that's just them realising 5 seasons they're losing money, and this is a good way to, 1, cause controversy, and 2, that'll get them views. I guarantee you that's why it's done. But again, why do you think all the trailers of Tomb Raider featured Lara Croft?
I think some people think is it's not done as much, certainly not on TV. Games is another world. I don't play.
Games are dark and shit. They always have been dark and twisted in the early days.
The idea of mature, I think, for a lot of people means dark as dark can get in terms of its dark actions. It's not simply a dark story, so it's like violence, rape, murder, all sorts of things. That's the idea of, well, that's mature. It's not. It's dark and gritty as anything, but it doesn't add anything to the story necessarily.
I would argue mature is what you, the viewer, reader, player, make of it.
Mature writing for me is something that's a bit more psychological.
Yeah, psychology is a wonderful thing.
Because I'm trying to think of a brilliant example of something. It's stuff that you watch and there's not necessarily blood on screen or anything happening, but it's dark in that twisted sense of it takes your mind somewhere you didn't think. It takes your brain to a dark place.
Yeah.
And afterwards, oh my god, I can't believe I was just thinking.
Oh yeah, in terms of horror, the best person to horrify someone is themselves.
Yes.
The amount of blood and violence and guts ones the most scary one. If you can make someone think of something horrific, it's why I like audio diaries in games, because you'll hear someone die in the most horrendous way. You'll never get a definitive answer of what the fuck happened, but your mind creates this image that way more scary than anything any game could do.
That's a difference between
Exactly.
horror's going through. It has as well. It went through that phase of that's the big difference between a horror and a thriller. A horror, a lot of the time, is you see the carnage, see the blood and the gore and all that kind of thing. Certainly now, what you get is stuff that is just violence for the sake of violence. You got
That's
stuff
most
like
stories.
Hostel and things
That's
like that. And
shite.
Saw.
That's just hilarious.
The first Saw game was very clever.
It was alright. It suffered from killing you really unfairly.
Oh yeah, but
That game does not like you.
I would call the first Saw. That's a good example of like mature because it's clever and psychological, but it's horror still. It's not thriller. Whereas the later ones just became a matter of we were just doing it for more blood and gore now, and the story's losing its way a bit.
Just look at games these days.
But when you've got things, I'm trying to think of the early horror. We've looked at the Alien.
Alien Isolation. That does what Tomb Raiders try and do well. Someone trapped alone in a situation where they must survive, and must survive on their own brains alone, not because the plot demands they survive. Alien Isolation does that so very well. That game is arguably too intense. It's a weird thing, it's too good at what it does. But man, that game is. And I give a shit about Amanda Ripley, because she's a person, not trying to be this beacon for the writers' politics, or the game developers' politics. She is a human being.
A part you would feel the biggest culprit, ironically, for all this isn't so much the game companies that give us the material, but it's the audiences.
Oh yeah, I mean, if people say, it annoys when people say, "Oh, Lara Croft was TNA," but no, there is a character. If you can't look past TNA, it says more about you than the game itself. It's a large part of she's sexy, therefore she must just be there to be sexy.
Yeah.
But then let's say, look at Bayonetta.
It's that the audiences now have reached the point because we live in the world of fast. Everything's fast. We want everything immediate.
Oh.
A lot of people seem to be. That's why action films always do well at the box office now. No story. It's a very simple story. Lots of explosions, guns, shooting, violence. Great.
Yeah.
It's simple. We want cheap thrills.
No,
I don't think everyone does. I like.
I don't mind it. I like a good action film. You know,
I like a good action.
The new Mad Max film, it looks just insane.
I think the Mad Max film is actually quite apparently called the reviews actually a lot cleverer than it gives us.
It is, which I like, and there's just people complain about it already. But that's stupid. But from what I've seen, it looks it's Borderlands, the film.
It looks interesting. It doesn't quite appeal to. I'll probably see it at some point, but it doesn't immediately appeal to me. Mostly just because from when I watch, I'm thinking it's a lot of violence. It looks interesting, and
I don't mind violence over top violence. Hyper-violence works. Mortal Kombat is great, hyper-violence, but then it's not asking you to take it seriously. It's like, we're just going to blow a lot of shit up and rip people's heads off. Fucking enjoy it. Go. It's not trying to tell a deep and interesting story. Deep and interesting story requires subtlety and cleverness and not giving you everything, allowing the person to, an hour later, after they stop playing the game or watching the film, to go, wait a minute. It encourages you to think about it rather than just be given something you can put on Tumblr and...
A good example of the idea of violent of action films that have virtually no story and things like that.
Michael Bay.
The Expendables.
Michael Bay. Everything he makes. Yeah, Expendables, yeah.
The Expendables is a perfect example because
it's a love letter to the 80s.
Yeah, well, it is a love letter to the 80s because all the cast.
Yeah, all the cast. It's just like...
But yeah, Michael Bay stuff.
I can watch if I turn my brain off and my general bodily functions.
As our listeners will well know, I do not like Michael Bay.
I like him. I like most of. I like Armageddon, and in a dumb, it's just ridiculous kind of way. It's not a good film in any conceivable way, but in a dumb, a lot of shit blows up. Same reason carry on.
As we all know, my big thing is Transformers, and what he's done to the Transformers franchise is the action is there in place of story. The stories for all those films suffers a huge amount in place of fights and violence. I mean, the Transformers community, a lot of us... He changed Optimus Prime.
How dare
who for a lot of people is this paragon of hope and virtue and goodness. When you look at the TV series, he's never overly violent. You compare that with the films with his famous lines of "Give me your face," and ripping. He's incredibly violent in the Michael Bay films. Incredibly, it's not just like he's shooting loads of people. He's ripping them apart and that kind of a thing. It's a lot. It's not the people we knew. This isn't the Optimus Prime who children wept over when
society's moving. Things change.
I understand that, but there's a point. What you're doing there is you're doing the idea of
respect. Respect to what you're doing. If you're going to reboot or do a different version, something, a basic baseline of respect to what came before is required.
It's like that. It would be like taking Superman. Right, this is going to get very close to actually what happened to Man of Steel.
That film suffers from
you take Superman, and he mercilessly kills all of his opponents, ripping them to pieces. With no remorse.
That's just the 90s in comics, really.
But what happened to Man of Steel? Spoilers, if anyone hasn't seen it, although
I've heard about it.
Is when he kills Zod, you see he doesn't want to do it.
Yeah, but I argue he could just flown up.
Yeah, and he immediately and you can see the pain it puts him through after he's done it. Optimus Prime, no, he's quite happy to kill all the Decepticons.
Yeah, they're robots.
They're still living organisms. Stop it. Let's get into that debate.
Racism against robots. How do you feel?
But I think, mature storytelling, I think for some people, it just translates to violence and a gratuitous need of just blood and gore.
I will use my analogy. That's a 13-year-old trying to grow a beard version of mature. Trying to be adult and spectacularly failing so much. It's laughable. It's hilarious. Because they just don't quite get it. They're trying, obviously trying, they just don't quite get it.
But at the same time, what I think we're focusing on, in what all the stuff we've been talking about, seems to be the mainstream, the big box office mainstream stuff for what is the stuff that's successful.
So, yeah.
I say successful in terms of financial success.
Oh yeah, what is good and what is financially successful are frequently not the same thing. They can be, but frequently are not.
At the same time, as much as we complain about it, we still watch the stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes we watch it to be able to complain about it, because that way it's that whole thing of...
I'm British, I need something to complain about.
It's not just that, it's the whole thing of, if you want to actually have a conversation about something, you need to know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you can't just,
You can't just go, oh, it's rubbish, why? Because I think it is, I don't know why. That's not a well-formed argument. You need to know what you're talking about. I mean, as much as...
Just look at us, pretending we know what we're talking about.
Exactly. As much as I just complained about Game of Thrones, I still like the TV series, and I think parts of that...
You never did answer my question.
Oh, what was it?
Wait, do you think it's mature?
What, Game of Thrones?
Yes.
I would argue still yes, because at the same way, although you have moments of violence and gratuitous stuff like that, writing is still very clever in terms of what it does with the characters and where it takes your mind.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, because it's peppered enough with one thing, the other doesn't get much attention from a wider audience. But when you watch it, and you're therefore able to experience all of it, you see, that's clever writing. What you've done with the character there is very clever, and that's a very interesting move, and I didn't see it coming.
Does the violence make it clever? Would it work without the violent scenes? If it were just implied or inferred, not directly shown, would it be better or worse, in your opinion? All this is opinion-based, for you niggas.
Yeah, I know. I don't know, because the trouble is...
Because my opinion is visceral violence works when used sparingly. The more spare, the better, because it's a shock tactic. The more you do it, the less it affects you.
I think in the series... Well, the series doesn't have... It's got big moments of this visceral violence. At the same time, in the earlier series, certainly, it wasn't as often as it's become now. Part of that's the storyline, is you went from peace to war, and so therefore in a war setting you're going to have more visceral violence. At the same time, I would have trouble separating them apart now, purely because I love the series so much, and I know the books.
The book's better, in your opinion?
The book is better. The source material is always the definitive one. And I will always say, very often, the book is better than the series, because whenever I watch any film or television adaptation, I'll go, it's an adaptation. It will never be as good as the book, so I will never go in thinking I want it to be as good as the book. And that's my guess here.
Well,
Do I have to close it there?
yeah, we'll close it there. We may continue this discussion some other time.
Yes, that'd be good.
So yeah,